Hello viewers, tonight I'm going to continue my Final Fantasy VIII retrospective type series. Basically, for those of you who've watched the first video, you already know how I'm doing this. I'm basically looking through older Final Fantasy VIII footage of the first game, rather on the PlayStation. This is going to be done on a, how should I say, a totally Square Enix based, not necessarily Square Enix based, I mean to say Squaresoft based, basically retrospective. Nothing having to do with the remastered version. That had some things censored in it. The remastered version had some little artistic details taken out of it that I did not like. So the footage I'm going to be using is someone's playthrough of Final Fantasy VIII. I'm going to be looking through it and talking about various things. Those of you who saw the video about Yoshinori Kitase retracting his statement about Ultimecia, you already know what type of perspective I have. I believe that Ultimecia is Rinoa. It was an idea that I, along with many others, had when they were playing this game when they were kids. And they had come to the conclusion that Ultimecia is a very strange character. And frankly, there was just no explanation for her. She had no original backstory. Now, Dissidia Omnia, which, as far as I know, just like many other of Square Enix's bad projects, they shut it down. In Dissidia Omnia, they talk about how Ultimecia had a childhood, but we have to remember that, you know, in other words, it was different than Rinoa's, that she had her own unique type of backstory, which in the game, in Final Fantasy VIII originally, when Hironobu Sakaguchi was developing it, and you had all of those writers who were working on it, Ultimecia did not have any backstory. She had none. And so for Yoshinori Kitase to say he simply does not know if Ultimecia is Rinoa or not, that really opens this discussion that many of us had, that many of us wanted to have up again, because a lot of us were sort of maligned and people were saying, oh, Yoshinori Kitase, he said that Rinoa is not Ultimecia and all of you people are wrong. For a long time, many of us had just simply stopped talking because negativity around the conversation was just terrible, and you really could not get a word in edgewise. You really could not talk about this without either being embarrassed or just basically receiving a good deal of negativity from other Final Fantasy gamers who just did not like that you were even bringing up this idea that many of us had, and that used to be a very legitimate idea before the Square Enix age of basically, you know, making all types of sequels. And it is somewhat ironic that I'm talking about that, but let me put it this way. Out of all of their little spin-offs titles, I actually like Dissidia NT the most, because unlike the other Dissidia games, they did not try to basically add on to the story. I liked Dissidia NT from a fighting game perspective in that it was what it was. It was not trying to be an RPG and, you know, add on to the story of Final Fantasy and give the characters just different personalities. So you get what you get in Dissidia NT. It reminded me of the old days of Urkiage. What was that old fighting game that Squaresoft had released a long time ago? It sort of reminded me of the spirit of that. And I really liked it because Urkiage did not really they had Final Fantasy characters in it, like Cloud Strife and Tifa Lockhart. They had Sephiroth from Final Fantasy VII, but they really did not add on to those stories. It was just a fighting game. Now, of course, fighting games from that day and age, of course I'm talking about ages. This was only, what, 20, 30, it wasn't that long ago, but it feels kind of like it was. But anyhow, basically, that was a long time ago, but those fighting games, or at least that particular fighting game, Urkiage, I liked it for what it was. It was dumb fun. I like Dissidia NT for what it is. Because unlike Dissidia Opera Omnia and all of the other different type spin-offs for Final Fantasy, where they try to make sequels of particular games, they try to remake them, we have already seen what has happened to Final Fantasy VII, how they have remade that. Many of us thought they were just going to make a sort of really, really good remaster. Boy, were we wrong. We were quite wrong. They did more than remake it. They did more than, or rather, just basically make it again. No, they changed everything about it, and they really messed it up. They really messed it up terribly. And so those of us who know and who really grew up playing Final Fantasy 7, 8, and 9, for me, those were my first Final Fantasy titles. And I think I started with 7. I think peradventure, I think maybe I did them in order. Though there could have been a possibility that I had played 9 before I had played 8. I have no idea, to be honest. But I have to say that during those days, I was quite satisfied. I was satisfied with everything. Back in those days, you got your money's worth. You got more than your money's worth. Even today, if you can bear with the terrible graphics, it is fine. What I mean to say is that basically with 4 discs or 3 discs you have in Final Fantasy VII, everything you wanted from that game, you got. And the story and the endings were what they were, and they were excellent. I would even go so far as to say that even Final Fantasy X was pretty good, but when Final Fantasy X-2 came out and I got the perfect ending, to me that was perfect. There was even talk about making a Final Fantasy X-3, but I thought there really should not be that. But I think that these games having sequels, and these games having remasters, and these games having remakes, they have actually ruined the spirit and idea behind Final Fantasy that Hironobu Sakaguchi had come up with. The whole idea that many of us had as sort of people who had basically really enjoyed Final Fantasy VIII, of Rinoa being Ultimecia, it was sort of a secretive type of mystery that many of us, we thought, and no one could really say anything about it, because there were they could say things about it, but that was it. We did not see Ultimecia in any of these spin-off titles. And I think one of the reasons people are rather ardent, especially in sort of trying to disarm that theory, trying to destroy it, is mainly because of what Square Enix as a company would do in contrast to what Squaresoft did. During the good old days, having these theories was just, people would really sort of give them more credence, because there was no Dissidia, there was no Dissidia Opera Omnia where they're literally making a whole backstory behind Ultimecia. They were not using her in the video games like Dissidia NT or anything like that. But when these things came out, and when you had Final Fantasy Mobius, Ultimecia became a character that they wanted to use because of her unique design. And basically, we see that in the remake. Now, some of you may think, why would I even do a series like this or even try? This is really experimental. Why would I even go through the process of looking through all of the Final Fantasy VIII footage and basically expressing my opinions, leading to me hinting at, excuse me, did you know this? Did you know Rinoa and Cypher, or were in a relationship and all of these things, and basically looking through everything and wanting to go back and just exhaustively look through things. The reason I want to do this is because I will be honest. I have not played a Final Fantasy game since my last canonical one was the 13 series and 14. That was it. I was disappointed with both. I thought Final Fantasy XI was far better than Final Fantasy XIV just regarding experience and aesthetics. People may disagree with that. But anyhow, basically, I am not going to play any of these games anymore. Square Enix is just a company that I cannot rely upon to provide me a classic, Final Fantasy experience. Basically. And so, because of that, I have just decided there's no point in me playing Final Fantasy 16, 15, 17 when that comes out. I have no desire to play any of these games Square Enix is making. When Final Fantasy VII Remake came out, when I saw what it was, I decided no, I'm not playing that. I want just a remake of the original game. I do not want this. And they knew that was what the fans wanted. They knew that was what many of us wanted, but promoting and making these games for modern audiences was just too much of a temptation for them. They were not going to give us what we wanted. So basically, I'm at this point sort of a person who likes to sort of look back and sort of relive those classic memories. Maybe play it from time to time, but I have to say I do not have as much patience as I used to. So basically, if I do have my own gameplay footage for it, it will be later on. But right now, I'm just going to look at another person's footage and do some commentary. The subject of magic is going to be very important in this regard, in regard to Final Fantasy VIII. I think it has the most mysterious story of any of these Final Fantasy games. It is also the most romantic, especially if you think about it the way I do and many of us who are sort of old-fashioned Final Fantasy Squaresoft players. At this point, you can call many of us just Squaresoft loyalists at this point. We do not like the merger between Square and Enix. We despise it. People like myself, we no longer like Square Enix. We like the old Squaresoft when they were making games in hits like 7, 8, and 9. And once they took Hironobu Sakaguchi out, Final Fantasy X was probably the last best game they had made at Square Enix. And Final Fantasy X-2, that was good, but that was the last good spin-off title in my opinion. And of course, I do like Dissidia NT, because unlike the other Dissidia games, they were not trying to impress too many personalities on the characters to the point where they were trying to basically change the characters' personalities. I mean, there's a reason Dissidia Opera Omnia failed, and I'm glad it did. They have been trying to use these old ideas for these characters, and they're still doing it, taking their identities and just warping them. Shaping them to their own desires, and basically who Ultimecia is different than what Ultimecia was in Final Fantasy VIII. Who Cloud Strife is different than who Cloud Strife was in Final Fantasy VII, the original. He is different. All of the characters that we knew are different. And so in order to really have good memories about all of that, you just have to just stop playing these sequels, honestly. But anyhow, without further ado, I suppose I should get started. Okay. I mean, this is sort of a little bit of commentary gameplay that I did on Gauntlet mode, I believe. I think I went through part 1. We watched this video. Before. This was part 1. Now we can go to part 2. So this is the one where he has to go to Fire Cavern. You won't be able to take part in the seed exam unless you basically get this GF. Okay. I mean, this... How you get GFs has always been somewhat of a interesting thing in my opinion, because some, you know, for Ifrit, I believe that's how you pronounce it, you just get him and he is just basically standing in the cave, and some others you get from objects. What Guardian Forces are is somewhat, I mean, they are interesting beings, because in a way they seem like they're guardian spirits or guardian angels in a way. They can be on items, they can just stand out in the world, you can put them in your body, you can literally junction to them, which means to join them to you. So, very interesting concept, to be honest. This was a very funny interaction, I always thought. Selfie, or whatever her name is. One of the more pleasant characters in this particular game. But I do plan to do some research regarding guardian spirits, thought forms, things like that. Because I think that they have some connection to this game's narrative in regard to influencing it and influencing the idea of guardian forces. Now the card game, although it was simple, it could get hard at times. And I remember during my playthroughs I never really was able to really get off the good cards. A lot of, you know, there have been some people who have really stuck with it and been able to beat very characters who had some of the special cards that are of different characters. And there are so many different cards in this game. Really, it mainly is, what do they call it? This one is not called Tetramaster. I think it's called Triple Triad. But basically, I think is, in order to really sort of master that, you just have to basically spend a good deal of time in the game getting cards, turning monsters into cards. And my memories of playing this game were of me spending a lot of time doing various things like that, and grinding an immense deal. So this is her explaining about, I think, now this is something I want to look at, because this is something, when I think about the idea of guardian forces, this is going to be a concept that, especially if we want to understand the story on a deeper level, and what influences the story, what type of ideas influence the story. This idea of junctioning and guardian forces and what they do, we are going to see it repeated over and over again. And of course, for those of us, you know, who have played the game, you know, I may very well reveal spoilers. I will try not to. But basically, the idea of this entity basically becoming one with you on a level, you joining it to your flesh, your mind, it being connected to your mind in your, sort of as an immaterial entity, immaterial spirit. It has to do with guardian spirits, it has to do with guardian angels, it has to do with thought forms. But this is something you can sort of use and draw power from. But even though you are drawing power from it, even though it is giving you strength, in a way, as we are going to, as some of you may already know, it takes some of you as well. And I think going on a deeper level, you can say that even in some cases, that an idea can even form them. But basically, when I get to the subject of thought forms, of Griever and, Squall and his sort of adulation for the lion, his idea of a lion sort of symbolizing strength and him being a loner, but this lion is always with him. And then for whatever reason, that lion is connected to Rinoa because she sees him with his necklace. She wants, a ring or whatever it is that he is wearing that basically has this lion insignia on it. And she wants one. She keeps it. And somehow Ultimecia is able to junction herself to such a personal thing as that the only two characters that we knew who interacted with that symbol on such a personal level were Squall and Rinoa. So yeah, the Guardian Force is going to give you strength, but also in a way that's going to take part of your mind and spirit, or just form and sort of fuse to your mind and spirit. So yes, this is giving you strength. The stronger the GF becomes, the stronger you become, but you're losing part of yourself. Almost as though, in a way, the idea of the Guardian Force, or the sort of the elemental strength, or, as a sort of principle. If the Guardian Force is a principle, you are sort of becoming or sort of representing that principle in a sense. And I think when we get to the end of the game, all of those concepts come full circle, in my opinion. So I am looking at everything, just reading all of the dialogue and really just trying to make sense of the ideas I had when I was younger. And of course, this is a tutorial. Many people thought this game was extremely confusing. But for the most part, I would have to say that it was not terribly hard for me until I got to the end of the game and I had to face there was a big difficulty spike when you got to the end of the game. And if you did not get the weapon magazines, if you did not spend your time learning how to get them, you were in a pretty precarious situation for the most part. Oh my goodness. I really have not had the time to just basically boot up an emulator and play this for myself again, like I did years ago. It really hath been years since I've played Final Fantasy VIII, to be honest. But basically, for this subject of Ultimecia, this is something I've been thinking about it, because for a long time I was sort of restrained in expressing my opinion, because I thought, I really should not talk about this because people do not like it. That it's an idea that many people think is just terrible. But at this point, I just think I might as well just do what I usually do and just make a very experimental series. Be prepared for a lot of rambling, honestly. Now the design of this particular Guardian Force is very Quizzicoto, or whatever his name was. I always thought that they were designed, the Guardian Forces, in regard to summons. They had a very good design in Final Fantasy VIII in comparison to... Well, I think all of them looked good. Final Fantasy VII, 8, and 9, but especially 8. I really liked the artistic direction of this game. Some people like Final Fantasy 9 more. For me, I think my favorite, in regard to just overall art style and sort of adult-sized characters, which is interesting. If you look at the... if you think about it, Final Fantasy VIII, in regard to Final Fantasy 7, 8, and 9, I think Final Fantasy VIII has the youngest cast of characters. But they all look more adult than the characters in Final Fantasy 7 and the characters in Final Fantasy 9 especially. Because their proportions are like adults. And I really like that. I think Final Fantasy VIII was a good deal. There was something that was more mature about this game. Though I would say that there were a few translation differences that I have to say that did not... I suppose they were not all that well. But for the most part, for example, the speech that Adia gave in Deling City, or whatever you call it, apparently, and I have read the Japanese version that's been translated into English, and apparently, it is somewhat different, but for the most part, in regard to message, I think the speech that Ultimecia gives in Deling, it is still quite similar, and the message, the overall message is still delivered in sooth. Now, one problem, of course, that the older games had was just scale. There were not really many places you could go in these areas. They were not that big, and of course, Balamb City was just what's it, Balamb Town? Because I really do not think it was a city. They had cars in this game too, but where could you really go? I mean, there was a road you could drive on for a few areas, but eventually you could not even use cars. And you were basically just using chocobos for the most part. But there were a lot of interesting secrets in this game. Just very mysterious things in it. Alright, that is part 1 of this particular part. Okay. I have another video here. I'm trying not to play the music so loudly so that my voice will not be occluded in the noise. The amount of grinding that this game had was quite extensive. I think more so than perhaps... I felt as though I grinded more in Final Fantasy VIII than I did in Final Fantasy IX and 7. Though, between all of those 3 games, I would have to say I really despised Final Fantasy IX merely for the purpose merely for the reason that Beatrix. The only reason I do not like Final Fantasy IX is because of Beatrix. Because you cannot beat her, and it just felt it felt like such a big disrespect to me as a character, or rather as a player, because I remember I would try to grind for that fight, and I would basically spend time grinding level after level, having the best weapons I could to face Beatrix and Burmecia. Because I thought, I'm going to get her this time, and then I finally win, and it turns out she still beats me anyhow with a Clem Hazard, and then, or with a stock break, and then she uses Clem Hazard. And in order to get a particular sword that Steiner can get, to get Clem Hazard, the amount of work that you have to do is ridiculous. If you do not know, Steiner can also learn Clem Hazard, but you have to literally rush and try to complete the game as fast as you can. But ultimately, Beatrix basically just disrespects your whole party, even though your characters will eventually do things, you know, far more monumental than what Beatrix has done. I mean, they will go on to fight Necron and fight bigger bosses than her, more skilled enemies and so forth. But I just have to say, I really, that just annoyed me so much. Beatrix is just awful, in my opinion. But yes, the Fire Cave. One of the few places we can, I think, between this cave and the place where you find Bahamut, I think, oh, and then there's the brothers, so you did get to go to places and literally find Guardian forces just out and about, but you had to go to weird, you know, forsaken, like ruins and caves and, you know, testing sites, things like that. But it is almost as though a Guardian Force almost has a spiritual and as well as a physical nature. And of course, this malleable nature is obvious when, due to the fact that you can literally join them to your flesh. Junction basically means the same thing as connect or join to. So in a sense, they are sort of one with you. And I remember they gave you a time limit, but it really was not needed because, I mean, this was a pretty easy fight for the most part. And it was a very small area. And, oh my goodness, Quistis was she was such a flirtatious character. I think in the ending they sort of hint towards Quistis and Cypher. You know, sort of, you know, potentially getting closer and having a relationship, but during those days, on the PlayStation 1, the endings and the story were all, after the ending, it was all open-ended because basically, things ended. Viewers, do you remember when things used to end at Square Enix when they could make a game? Or, never mind, I mean Squaresoft, rather. Well, I mean, that ship has already sailed. When it became Square Enix, they were going to beat dead horses until, I mean, they still beat dead horses at Square Enix. All of the creative potential that people like Hironobu Sakaguchi had and all of those writers, they cannot let them lie to rest. They cannot make new ideas and use new concepts and just do something different. Hironobu Sakaguchi half left, and so I think that is the biggest challenge for Square Enix. They do not want to stop making the same games with the same characters. Final Fantasy used to be, you know, but anyhow, this is basically going to be just me rambling throughout this entire video. If you know, some people may not like it, but I am going to do that. But anyhow, do you remember when things ended? Was that not a novel and very exciting? I mean, not necessarily novel, because it used to be that way. You know, in some cases, not everything was a sequel. And I feel like I just want to go back to those days. And it's almost as though today they can rewrite anything. They can rewrite anything that they want to rewrite. You know, anything that we remembered in the past, all of that history behind, hey, a Final Fantasy game is going to be a different story each time. Oh, here's Squall again in what? You know, a new Dissidia, or, you know, Final Fantasy Mobius. And it used to be, sure, you know, Final Fantasy Tactics had, you know, Cloud Strife, or I think Cloud Strife was in Final Fantasy Tactics, but I think, and even an Urkiage, but at the same time, the way they add on to the stories now, it really has ruined my whole experience with Final Fantasy. Anyhow, he's gonna use fire, and I think he punches you, you know, and when you use Shiva, he would say something. Diamond Dust. And I remember you had to type the square button, and you had to do it very specifically to raise damage. And he saith, "They have Shiva!" Okay. It was fire, 61 damage, cast Cure. One thing I have to say, and all Final Fantasy games have grinding, sure, but I would have to say that the stock and draw system made it so that, in a way, unless you were just using draw, after you stocked 99 of everything, you know, potentially, or even if you did not want to do that, you were in this constant situation where you had to just keep drawing things. You know, keep drawing spells and drawing magic. Because you can never really have enough. And I think that was one of the reasons why a lot of people, you know, do not like Final Fantasy VIII. Is he gonna say something again? Not bad for a human. Okay. But yeah, that can get annoying. Impotent humans. Does a punch. But I mean, that can get annoying. Having to draw over and over again. And of course, Squall had that his system where if you hit with the gunblade, you have to press R1. They put some little interesting things in the game that sort of made you use a bit more skill in button pressing. And I think that was awfully unique to Final Fantasy VIII at the time. I think they wanted to get you a little more involved in the action. Somewhat like Legend of the Dragoon. I forget which company made that. In Sooth. He's drawing again, of course. And you just waste so much time just drawing over and over again. Personally, I really think that drawing for boss battles is probably not something I would want to do, but, you know, I mean, of course, unless they have a Guardian Force or you want to cast something, of course, bosses would sometimes have some really good spells that you want to stock. They absolutely would. Oh, I've underestimated Shiva. Very well, I will join you. Okay. So, Ifrit, that was a, you know. And you could get those cards. You could get Guardian Force cards. there were a lot of powerful cards you could get. And I think one of the most powerful were probably character cards. Is that it for 3? Okay, viewers. I think I've done enough rambling for for now. Honestly, let me play a little more of this. Yes. So basically that was just me rambling about some of the early parts of the game. I plan to go through the whole of the game, whole of Final Fantasy VIII, and just basically talk about different things. When we get to the parts where I can really make connections with Rinoa and different other things, and just talk about even some of the, real world magical implications regarding Guardian forces, that will be a bit more interesting. I am firmly of the opinion that I can very substantively make those connections. If you do not know, some of the concepts that Final Fantasy VIII uses, such as, genies and lamps, where you get Diablos, and, the Doom Train ring, there are, how should I say, there is a history of people believing that items, artifacts or rings or, lamps can have spirits in them. And so, that I do not believe has been often talked about in regard to Final Fantasy VIII. So, when we get to the point where I can see some of, I can sort of see some of that in game, I really would like to talk more about that, and I would like to do some more research in the meantime regarding concepts, regarding some of the magical concepts. And one thing that I've not really looked much into is the moon, because the moon also plays some role in this game. I mean, it may not be as big as the role that the moon playeth in a game like Elden Ring or Dark Souls, but there is still some. There probably are some, real world, how should I say, implications behind the moon, witches, magic, all of these things. But anyhow, these videos are going to be rather, how should I say, disconnected. The information, I mean, they're not going to really be structured for now. They're going to be more improvisational. And I sort of do this as a lead up for more structured content when I start to release, peradventure a theory video or something like that. So anyhow, viewers, for those of you who have watched, through this whole mess of rambling, thank ye, and may you be blessed, and farewell.